So I did not have a circle where I could feel safe and trusting. And it just was an inner struggle. And then if you wanted or expected warmth or closeness or even let alone intimacy, and you were perplexed why that wasn't happening, it just was a calamity it was just very frustrating all around. And I felt we were kind of drifting apart, not to mention additional other struggles also, in that space as well, the space of, love and closeness and intimacy, at even just at the human connection level.
Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast. I'm your host, Sven Masterson, coach, mentor, author, and fellow traveler on the path to mastery. Every man reaches the point where he knows he can't keep living the way he has been. The question is, what comes next? Here, you'll hear from men who've made the shift, men who've gone from stuck to unstuck, unshakable, and unstoppable. If you're ready to start moving forward, you're in the right place. In today's episode, I'm talking with Mohamed, a husband and father who found himself drowning in shame, depression, and disconnection. Not just from his wife, but from himself. Like so many men, Mohamed thought he had to fix his marriage to save his life. But instead, what saved both was learning to lay down his weapons and take radical ownership of his inner world. In this conversation, Mohamed shares what it really looked like to face his fears, release the obsession with saving his marriage, and discover something far more powerful: acceptance, unconditional high regard, and self-sourced trust. You'll hear how he went from being terrified of confrontation to becoming a steady presence in his home, from performing to prove his worth to becoming a man who knows it already exists. If you've ever felt like the only way forward is to get your wife to change, this episode will challenge that thinking in the best possible way and offer a glimpse of what's possible when a man takes full ownership of his life. Let's dive in. All right. Welcome to the Masterful Man podcast, Mohamed. Nice to have you today. I appreciate your willingness to come and share your story with not just our community, but with the public. I know that could feel like a really vulnerable thing to do. So, yeah, have you listened to any of the episodes so far? Have you listened to other men share?
Yeah, I did.
So you know a little bit about how this works. Right. You might know that I like to start just by orienting the listener to some basic demographics. You don't have to share too much private information, but your age range, your marital status, your parental status, where are you from, what do you do when you're not making podcasts with strange people like Sven Masterson, this kind of thing.
Sure, man. Thank you, Sven. Yes, I am 46. I just turned 46 recently. I'm married. I have 5 children. I'm living off of Atlanta, Georgia, of a northern suburb up there. And I'm in the technology space. So I'm a software architect, but been an engineer and a developer forever. Although I started out in finance, but I had to pivot sometime later. I'm originally from Egypt. So I came here when I was like around 17 to join college. And then was in Florida, finished my college, met my wife there, and married. And then when we had a good number of kids, I think when we reached 5, we decided, hey, Florida is too expensive. Let's move to Atlanta, Georgia. Georgia is cheaper and better weather and such.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a little bit about.
Yeah, I remember you being from Egypt, but I don't think I knew that you immigrated at that age.
Yeah.
That's pretty
yeah.
So are you first generation from your family to immigrate to the United States?
I am. Yep. I actually grew up in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. That's where I went to school. And they had visa restrictions and you couldn't stay there for too long. So there came a point when they were just basically evicting people who were not nationals. And my family was part of that wave. So my father made the bold move to move to the United States. So part of my family is in California and I just happened to, join college in Florida. So we came here. He dropped me off, bought me a bicycle from Kmart and said, go.
No kidding. No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, he borrowed money to pay for my first semester of college in Florida Atlantic University, Boca Raton. But the rest of my family moved on to San Diego because that's where my sister was kind of having college working out there.
Hmm.
And that's it. The rest is history.
Okay. So do you mind telling us at what age you got married?
25.
Okay. So you're in the States for 8 years after immigrating from another nation. All right. Yeah, this is all just really interesting context. Speaking of UAE, I won't mention his name, but we have a member of our community. We've had other members in the UAE before, but we have a man now who joined after hearing our podcast, interestingly.
Oh, wow.
He's a pretty neat guy if you haven't gotten a chance to meet him. So if we had met you a few years ago, and I did have that privilege, how would you have described yourself at that time as a man, as a husband, father, etc.?
A few years ago, to me, my life has been marked by a point in time where I entered a moment of crisis. So for me, it's kind of like the before era and the after era. So do you
Okay.
want to talk about the before era or
Yeah,
the
let's
era
talk
of?
about that.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. Before, because you said you're 46, you got married at 25, so you've been married now for 21 years, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
there's some demarcation in there that you're calling before and after, and I do like to start with that before because I think we all have those, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes a person listening to this podcast might be in there before, or they might be at a pivot point or somewhere else. So yeah, you start
Mhm.
wherever you'd like.
Sure. So yeah, I actually married my wife in 2003. So it actually becomes 22, more than 21 years that we've been married. And 22, it's funny. I call it. It was an interesting date, that era switch there. I'm born. It's funny. Like it hits. I'm born February 22nd, and in the year 22. So it was when it happened, 2022. That point, that age, when I hit that age, is the age when I was supposed to kind of like, okay, wake up. The before era was an era where I actually thought everything was awesome. I actually thought I was the best husband. I actually thought my wife, I thought we had the model example. I walked around thinking like, this is how you do it. This is what success looks like.
Yeah.
And
Can
little
you
did
say
I,
more about that? About like what made you think that
yeah,
you were a model husband?
I think I think now later that I know that I was just living a nice guy mindset where I thought I was doing all the right things, catering to my children the right way, making my wife happy, quote unquote, as to the extent that I thought I was making her happy. I thought like I would be entering conversations and coaching relatives and like, guys, this is how marriage should be. Let me tell you how it should be. But there were some symptoms. For example, there's certain things that like in the back of my mind annoyed me. The before me, sometimes I would see like when we would be walking, my wife and I, one thing that bothered me is like, how come she's just walking away? She's not walking next to me. Like, why is it that she's always ahead? It's almost like she's leading. And I'm like on the back here, kind of like shepherding my five children in some way. And I'm like, I would like to more often just be holding her hands, she by my side. The before Mohammed was always wondering why is the case. The before Mohammed wonders like, how come my wife is always driving the car? Like, why am I always in the side seat here? And because I suck at directions and I get lost and I'm too slow and I drive like a grandpa or a grandma. But these things were kind of like, you would feel like, wait a minute, these are symptoms that are telling of certain problems.
Okay, let me ask you
Yeah,
a question because
yeah,
I mean, all kinds of people are going to listen to this podcast, and some women. We actually have a lot of women listen to our podcast, and they might be saying, "So, well, so what? What's wrong with that?" And so, was it that you're personally bothered by your wife driving or walking ahead, or it sounds like maybe you were making some meaning out of those things?
yeah. I think, and again, here, a lot of what things I'm going to say are my perspective, and I acknowledge it's my perspective, which could be absolutely wrong. But I felt I wasn't allowed. It wasn't like, oh yeah, she can drive, and besides, today my wife also drives. But I can talk about the after
Yeah,
version of
we'll get to that.
us.
We'll
Yeah,
get to
but
that.
I just felt I was emasculated. I just felt like I wasn't fit. I didn't fill her eye enough. I felt like, and I think that was that's actually exactly the case. Or rather, there was a misalignment somewhere, and you could tell it in certain things. Um, there was point that before Mohammed would get resentful a lot, uh, a lot, Stonewall a lot, because he didn't understand that a lot of the things that he was not doing were actually causing the tension that is making the wife step up and fill in the gap where he wasn't. And Muhammad,
Okay.
the older Muhammad thought he was in some form of martyrdom, trying to still kind of in the corner here figure things out, and he thought he was doing the right things, but he was actually very angry inside.
Yeah, right. So, have you ever read my book, Narcissist or Not? Have you read any of that?
I want to.
Okay.
That's one of those.
So just understand, I'm not suggesting you are or were a narcissist.
I think that's okay.
Labeling, labeling people, especially men, narcissists is in vogue right now. And there's 8 different types of narcissism, and I think every man is going to check boxes in some of these categories. But what you're describing is what now, if your wife Googled these behaviors, she would undoubtedly find some description saying that you're either a vulnerable narcissist or a covert narcissist or both. This kind of sulking, brooding behavior while believing that you're doing a great job and why can't she see, and feeling like you're
100%.
sacrificing resentment.
100%.
And I'm saying that as a man who lived in that story too. Anyway, yeah, that book. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because you and I were both fortunate in that we experienced our transformation before this became in vogue. But today, a lot of men are seeing their families completely come to an end because they're living the same things that men have struggled with for probably centuries. And they're being labeled a narcissist. And then their partners are finding information also online saying there's no hope for these men. It's a lost cause. Get out, etc. So I'm just sharing that as a matter of gratitude because that's not how your story went. That's not
100%.
how mine went.
I couldn't be more grateful. I think as we, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
there's so much,
So
yeah, so
So
much
to
to be said.
summarize it, what I hear you saying is that you were a husband and father. You thought you were doing a really great job, but you had some nagging resentments that were geared towards, hey, why doesn't my wife see some of these things? And more importantly, the thing that you said there that really jumped out at me and I want to highlight for our listener is that you felt emasculated, and you didn't use this word, Muhammad, but basically invisible at times to your wife. You didn't feel
Yeah,
like you filled her eyes, and you're like a lot of us. You wanted your wife's adoration and appreciation, it sounds like.
100%.
So yeah, maybe speak a little bit more to the emotional landscape
Yeah,
and how
yeah.
that started to build for you.
For me, it was like, why am I not being respected? I'm like, respect was a big thing for me. And I never knew the language of communication. I didn't know how to communicate. Really, that's the biggest. The other Mohammed, the older Mohammed, was terrified of confrontation. Confrontation or conflict meant doom. And I avoided that at all costs. And I just had to swallow things. And I actually realized that no, it's okay. I think there's a very, very important role for conflict as long as it's done in a decent way and done respectfully. So the emotional side was completely isolated, completely alone, completely helpless. Who do I go to? I come from a Muslim background, so and on top of that, so I would say I'm emotionally, or where my upbringing was very traditional. Everything was taboo, at least in my interpretation of it. I never emotionally grew up to understand how to communicate my emotions. One thing I learned from you, Sven, is that generally men have 3 emotions: angry, sad, happy, or something like that. And I think the gradation of emotion, the emotional language, is something I did not even understand. And when I saw the emotion wheel and it had like all this fan out, I did not even know what I was feeling. And I could forget about talking to someone and saying, I don't know what's going on. So I did not have a circle where I could feel safe and trusting. And it just was an inner struggle. And then if you wanted or expected warmth or closeness or even let alone intimacy, and you were perplexed why that wasn't happening, it just was a calamity it was just very frustrating all around. And I felt we were kind of drifting apart, not to mention additional other struggles also, in that space as well, the space of you know, uh, you know, love and closeness and intimacy, at even just
Yeah.
at the human connection level.
The way I like to look at this situation you're describing is a bit like when you start kindergarten, you learn the primary colors. But imagine if you only learned the primary colors and you tried to be an artist, but you know 3 or 4 colors max. And I don't know that a lot of people can appreciate that that is the emotional landscape for a lot of men. They're told or taught, and they're taught that those colors aren't even really acceptable to use. But they're not really taught how, broader palette emotionally. And there is this concept that I have found to be reliable. There's a name for it, but it escapes me. That you can only think as deeply as your vocabulary. So the more words you learn, the more precise your language becomes, the more precise your thinking and internal dialogue becomes. And so when you only have 3 emotional words, especially if you're in a partnership or relationship with a woman who has a much broader vocabulary than you, it can be a real big imbalance because she's looking for, a lot of a broad palette. She's accustomed to that. She wants to connect with you on that level, but you just know red, red, blue, and yellow kind of a thing. So one of the steps that does help men, and I'm saying this more for our listener than for you because you know this, is to learn how to get your emotional language, like quite literally the language, a little bit broader. And what that gives you is much more precision. And there's research apparently to suggest that the broader your emotional language precision gets and your experience, that the bigger your well-being, the bigger your sense of positive well-being.
100%. 100%. I think if there was one more, like after going through the renewed masculine man journey that you've set out, which was a deep, many month long journey of self discovery, self reflection, writing down, journaling, it became evident that a lot of my behavior was rooted in shame. A lot of my behavior was rooted in very low self worth, esteem, and such. And after all that evaluation, it was the root, of all things. The concept of self love made no sense to me. I'm still in the journey to understand what self love actually means. But acceptance and such are all concepts that are things that were unknown to the prior Mohammed. Like, what does that even mean? Because growing up in a survivalist mentality where you're supposed to kind of get into the middle class and make it in this new country, perfection was what's expected of you. As the oldest of my 5 siblings, for us, we held a very high standard of performance that was ideal, and that was what defined our self-worth. And self-worth was always transactional in a way. You work hard, you get a grade. You do the dishwasher, you expect a hug and a kiss. So everything was that. And I do something, I expect respect in return. And it was binary and simple. It was very rudimentary. It got me where I got career-wise because that could work transactionally. But yeah, I mean, if you don't realize what your emotional landscape is and why am I doing something, and why is this, like, just the journey through the coaching made me question the 5 whys constantly. But why? And then, but why? Just peeling the onion was essential for me to just sit back and say, wait a minute. And then ownership. Let's not even begin there.
Yeah, we'll get into all that in a minute. I want to spend a little bit of time just kind of getting to the point of where all of these things started to show up in your life in a way that you took some action, right? Because
Yeah.
I know in hindsight, we have clarity in hindsight to understand how these problems were showing up in our life. But most men generally do not start taking action to address these until they're in some sort of crisis. So you talked about this a little bit. So you had periods of sulking, you had periods of stonewalling and disconnection. This was showing up for you not feeling super connected with your wife. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Like how was this? How are they appearing in the day to day for you with your relationship with your wife and not
Yeah.
just her, right? Where
Yeah.
your relationship with your kids, with work.
Yeah. That's in the prior version, right? Okay. Everything was personal. Anything was personal. If she frowned, that meant something. It meant something. Oh, she's upset. She's upset. It means I suck. It means I'm horrible. It means I'm not measuring up. Everything was like that. She's not in a good mood. She's in pain. I look at that from a distance. I try to make a judgment. There she goes again. It's her. It's her. It's not me. Look at me. I'm doing everything right. I'm awesome. I look at me. I just to the backyard again. I didn't realize that I was not self-driven. All the things were. I realized. I always found that I was always being told. It felt like a mother-child relationship, and I was the resentful boy who was always like waiting for an instruction. Because I couldn't even lead myself. I was assuming I'm always waiting for a task to be assigned to me. I mean, now I'm looking at that back, but as I'm looking at that back, it always was this boy who was trying to please, coming from a teacher at school. They were all females. I think 95% of my teachers growing up were female. Growing up really in a feminine world where good boy was obedient, and when good boy did task, good boy got praise. When that translated over to wife, it did not. So my operations there were like, wait, the formula I'm working on is not connecting. Wait, I mean, I know this is how a mother, teacher, feminine aunt type personality should behave, and this is not computing. Why is wife not working the same way?
Yeah.
So if I was driving my, and be it driving, be it any chore, like it was like, oh, if I didn't do a chore on time and she reacted negatively to that, or she just gave me standard input, or she just wanted to express freely what she felt, I immediately came in, okay, that's a threat. That's a threat because I know I'm doing the best, whatever.
You're describing a way of being that seems to be really common with firstborn children.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're very articulate, they're very conscientious, they're very task checklist oriented. I think the way I have known you is that you're a guy that likes to live by a plan, a checklist, to like get your ducks in a row kind of a thing. And that became strategy, it sounds like, for you, that you thought, hey, if I do these things correctly, if I follow the plan, if I check the boxes, I'm supposed to get the stuff, right?
Yeah. Why not?
And when you don't, that becomes the source of resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. Like
yeah,
this
and then
is
things
this is
go
unfair.
sideways.
This is unfair. Well, I've earned it.
So talk a little bit more about connection and intimacy to the degree that you're comfortable, and how
Yeah.
that started to, if it was impacted, how it started to be impacted, and like what would be the red flags looking back for you now that maybe you didn't see, but you see now as like, oh, wow, yeah, that's not good.
I mean, this touches the core, honestly, to me personally, the root of too many problems in my life. I think it may have started from day one when I got together with my wife, and I've not really experienced intimacy or known about it before marrying, again because of my conservative background and such. So I never really dated before marriage, ever. I never really had relationships before. So my wife was my first feminine, let's call it, partner, love partner. I lacked all the maturity at every aspect of being emotionally connected to a woman, intimately connected to a woman at any level, be it emotionally, let alone physically. And that caused problems because I didn't know what to do and I didn't get a lot of guidance and I had no background. And that was one. And then I kept it quiet, and I kept it quiet. And whatever struggles I had, I kind of pretended like they weren't struggles. And this showed up in the most intimate of situations. It showed up in bed. It showed up in terrible performance. I have to say, I think I was never able to satisfy my wife, to the extent that she would have liked, either emotionally as much or even physically. Like, I think a lot of my foundations were not stable as a person. And so I have to also say that during my college years, I was coping with these struggles and suppressing my own needs for intimacy and making up for those by going to explicit sites, which itself kind of messed me up in many ways. It messed me up because it just added a ton of guilt and shame to me. It messed me up because it set wrong standards for what true love and intimacy was. It became an outlet of sorts to express my frustrations or express my stresses or my anxieties. And it became a terrible phase where I wished I understood better what a man to woman relationship would be. And I didn't understand. I didn't have the language. I was just kind of let alone to figure these things out. And all of that resulted in a very unsatisfactory intimacy with my wife. And she had to live through that for many, many, many years. And that's been an ongoing struggle. And if anything, it was the root of my emasculinity to me. It was like I could never be a man enough. So all those other little things that I mentioned earlier was one thing. But if you could not be at the emotional and physical level a full-fledged man, in my core, that was like the utmost kryptonite. And I knew it. And I didn't know what to do about it. So that was, and has been, and continues to be, by the way, an area of challenge that I continue to work on as we speak. And it is not something, it is kind of like the biggest hill of true next level intimacy that I'm working on overcoming.
We'll get there. We'll get there. It's part of the journey. So to just kind of repeat back to you what I hear you saying, kind of big picture is, here's a man who grew up in a very conservative environment, culturally, religiously. You come to the United States as a teenager. You've had no romantic relationships, including, teenage girlfriends, this kind of thing. You start college in an environment that's not your home turf. You feel isolated. You've self-described as having a small emotional vocabulary, which is a common problem for all men generally. And the way you cope with that is erotic material, which I mean, estimates are pretty high that, this is going to also impact all men. Now, one thing I just don't know enough about, I'm wondering if you could comment on, but from a worldview perspective, from growing up as a Muslim in Egypt, was that like a forbidden thing? Was there a lot of like a sense of even deeper shame and guilt that would come from
100%.
that? Okay.
100%.
I figured. So you have this coping thing that's probably really confusing because you're a teenage male who is experiencing their sexuality and sex drive, but also under an umbrella of, some messaging about shame, not for being sexual, clearly, but for maybe some expressions of this, right? And so not just that, but what you didn't say, but reading between the lines is, you're having received very little instruction about what healthy sexuality looks like between a man and a woman. You started a relationship having really had your brain programmed by erotic material, which if nobody's talked to you about, male-female relationships otherwise, you have no way of knowing how realistic something is or not. Yeah, so this is the big problem. And plus, your brain's programmed that like this is what sex should look like with a woman, right? This is the way she'll respond. And not realizing that, the material you might find online is acting.
Yes. I mean, I think the worst part that I regret is that I didn't realize, and I didn't know the vocabulary for that, was that I was objectifying. And I think that's a disastrous thing for a man to do. I didn't know that was what that was, because it wasn't a human. And I think that if there's anything that's most regrettable, it's that it was a very selfish, objectified type of relationship between a man and a woman, which is, we don't think about it, but I think that's...
Are you open to some feedback?
Of course.
Okay. I wholeheartedly believe that. I believe that pornography is a destructive force. However, one thing people don't talk about, and I think should be talked about more, is that a man's being drawn into erotic material is not wholeheartedly and exclusively because of, some sort of terrible character defect. I would suggest that what men really are attracted to in porn and erotic material is, and I'm sure people are going to misunderstand this and probably just beat me up about this, but is the desire to be naked and unashamed. And I don't think pornography is a healthy expression of this at all. But I think we don't spend enough time talking about this idea that why are men drawn to porn? Mm-hmm. Is it really like that they're perverts, that there's something wrong with them? Or is it that what they really look for, what they really long for is intimacy? And the reason I'm saying that as a man who talks to guys that are hurting all the time is when we peel the onion and we distill what's going on in their emotions, guys aren't really upset about the mechanics of their sex life. What they want at the end of the day, they'll all say it, is deep emotional connection, intimacy. And interestingly, I would say a lot of men have a deeper thirst and longing for intimacy than many women I've spoken to. Like they want a soul level spiritual union with a woman. And I personally believe it's that
100%.
that is the real reason men get drawn into porn. Because here's the thing, you don't have to actually take any vulnerable risk to be known, to be seen as you are. You can keep your shame and engage with something like porn, which is like, it kind of checks some dopamine boxes, but it kind of dances around the edge of this intimacy that people want, right? But it's not satisfactory. And again, I'm not in any way justifying porn. I agree with you. It's objectifying not just to the women, but to the men too. And that it's not the healthiest thing we could do. But I would love to have more conversations with men in the world about like, hey, let's talk about being naked and unashamed, because what you find is the more men feel at peace with themselves when they're overcoming shame, that tends to be a reliable way of overcoming porn addiction. And, there's a lot of these ways that people are trying to beat that. And a lot of it is also shame-based. They try to basically, just self-discipline themselves away from those behaviors. But if you help a man overcome shame, it'll restore his sense of self-worth. And with that, it's a more reliable way to get away from those kinds of challenges. But anyway, I just want to throw that in there to see what you thought about it, because you're a man that I know to be pretty articulate about his insides. And
I mean, what you're saying really is the crux of it. I want to just elaborate a bit more. I always had a struggle, and I did not know why I could not stop myself. Like if I got the urge, and I avoided it as much as I could and struggled, and then what they call white knuckled. I don't want to, but then I weakened, and I never for the life of me. And I would repent and regret, and for a while, and it was always a cycle of complete struggle, and it was a vicious cycle. What I learned from you, Sven, is what you just said. The last few words you said was that it's a concept. It's the idea of self-worth. Until I understood that a man has to be value driven, his worth and value are something that he lives by. And I didn't know what that means. Like, I don't think I ever did an exercise of what are your values and what is your, like, what is it what is your character? Your self worth is not about what you do. Your self worth is about what fills your life, what fills your cup. And if you didn't know how to fill your cup, then you will quote unquote fill your cup, or you think you are filling your cup by doing all these negative habits and or addictions because you didn't discover what it is that you were set out to do. If you had a bigger vision in life, if your life was rich enough, if you were steady within, then you wouldn't need that type of outlet, because you would have interpreted it as a fuller man. And I think that's what I lacked.
Well, you had what I would describe as typical among men, which is a seeking-based self-worth, which it's ironic that we use this term self-worth, as I've said in other episodes, self-worth, because most people do not have a sense of worth that is derived from self. It's actually externalized. And for men, a huge variable in their equation for how they feel valuable will be how women feel about them. 100%. So that's not self-worth. That's like, what do women say I'm worth? 100%. And so this is also a big driver in people's attraction to porn, attraction to sexual validation from a woman, is that if your sense of value and worth is increased by your sexual prowess, your sexual skill level, the moment you can't be great, you lose your sense of value, worth, identity, significance, which is itself a horrible outcome, because now you have no power to feel powerful unless a woman tells you or affirms this in some way by her sexual attention. And this is also it's worse than objectification for women. It makes a woman's response to you sexually high stakes. And so she's not actually free to just be real. because now she feels responsible for your self-worth.
100%.
So it's not like, hey, I just didn't have a good sexual experience. She can't even really be true about that, because it's so crushing to you as a man, because your self-worth is all tied up in
Yeah,
the sexual counter.
it's a vicious downward spiral. She owns my emotional well-being and self-worth. But yet, how can she do it if I couldn't offer it? And it just is a spiral that is negative,
Yeah.
because when I even get a hint of it, then that feeds into the anxiety cycle.
And here's where it gets worse for a lot of men, because that's how you show up in the bedroom. It's like high stakes for you as a man, because your self-worth is tied up in how that moment goes. First of all, I would suggest that is the number one real reason men have PE and ED, is because they're entering a sexual experience with these high stakes, right? And so that's fundamentally an anxious position to take in the bedroom. And if you're anxious in the bedroom, you're going to have either a hard time with getting aroused, or you're going to struggle with PE, right? And again, too, like, we find men who work with us over time generally improve both those conditions, because they're addressing the underlying thing. But here's where I was going. That wasn't the point. That was an aside. So these encounters happen a lot less, because as a woman matures and grows wise to, like, hey, this doesn't feel good that you're using me for sexual validation or self-worth validation, she's going to do one of two things. She's going to accommodate you with a lot of resentment, because she's going to feel like she's doing something she doesn't want to do, or she's going to avoid you, probably still with some resentment, because she wants to be sexually intimate but doesn't feel like she can. And when you're that guy who I described earlier as maybe a little vulnerable, covert, narcissistic, you're deeply hurt that she won't engage with you sexually. And where do you go when you're deeply hurt as a man and with these problems? What do you turn to?
Yes. I mean, I can, yeah, I mean, I think you might regress back to unhealthy
Yeah.
habits.
Yeah. So this is kind of, it feeds like this kind of shame spiral for men, that they want to be intimate. They want spiritual intimacy, sexual, physical intimacy. They notice their partner's disinterest, disconnection. And so, she goes to bed and they go look at porn, right? Or maybe they pleasure themselves. They have their own coping mechanism, but then they feel more shame. And this keeps perpetuating this low sense of self-worth, which then places them at a place in the relationship with a woman where she's like, I don't want to be responsible for making you feel good about yourself. So she stays distant. And then a man will go through all kinds of shenanigans. How do I get my partner to stop being so avoidant, not realizing their anxiety and their thirst for a sexually validated self-worth is pushing the woman away? Yeah, this is a really, really ugly cycle that happens to a lot of men. And I think they're stuck. And a lot of them will start, they'll either grow, they'll either hit a crisis, or they will come to deeply resent and even hate the woman, thinking they have a bad woman who's not giving them what they feel entitled to, and all kinds of dysfunctions.
It gets worse, exponentially worse, when the man puts it on the woman. When I
Which
say it's actually your
most do.
fault. If
Yeah.
I had more of this, if I had more of that, if you were more available, if I did more of this wouldn't happen. It's actually you. And nothing this makes the woman at that point more dissatisfied and more
Yeah.
felt unjustly, like not just is she now responsible for upkeeping your emotional state and your validation, now she also has to deal with you putting the blame on her. Like, it's the worst dynamic ever between two people who are supposed to be lovers.
Right. I mean, and women have, I'm sure, their own ways that they experience the feminine part of that. But imagine if your wife said, "Hey, I'm unhappy in life because you're not more handy. You don't make enough money," and it just came up with a litany of things that maybe are sensitive topics for you. Like, I've said it in other episodes. If our wife said, "Hey, if you could just add a zero or two or a couple digits to the end of your salary, I'd finally be okay." Or if you could do 100 things here in our home to, vastly improve it. Maybe something that to you feels like hey, I don't have to be a contractor to do something like this or something. But imagine if you were given this like, hey, you have to accomplish this great thing in order for me to love you. And it's your fault that I'm unhappy in the meantime. But this is how a partner feels in that moment.
Yeah.
And so they're feeling that we're simultaneously dissatisfied with them, but we want more of them at the same time, which is like, that's a head
Yeah.
twister.
Yeah. So it does not compute.
Does not compute.
That's how unhealthy cycles are. I think it takes a huge deal of ownership, number one, on the man's side, for the man to sit back and like, okay, where does my worth come from? Become an actual, true grown up man, grow up,
Yeah.
You're no longer the boy in the school we are. And for the woman also and my wife has shown unbelievable, tremendous growth and working on herself. It takes a huge amount of effort also for the woman to step up and begin to understand where she's coming from. Because I can tell you this, I mean, and maybe this comes into the latter phases, the post-crisis phase and how things change. But for now, I'll just leave it at that. I think the woman itself herself, once she decides to work on herself, there's a path forward to help
Right.
break out of these unhealthy cycles.
There is a sequence to it. And one of my personal perspectives that is very different than most modern marriage therapy and counseling is that most modern marriage therapy and counseling tries to get a man and a woman to do this in lockstep. It's like a three-legged race, if you ever had those in school when you were a kid, where what I find a really reliable sequence is if you help a man go on his own personal journey about value, worth, significance, self-worth, and he heals to the place where he's no longer deriving his sense of self-worth from outside of himself. He's addressing shame. He will become emotionally safe, which we'll have an episode here shortly about emotional safety, separate topic. But an emotionally safe man creates an environment in the relationship where his partner can explore their own issues from life, their own trauma, their own, dysfunctions, which all humans have, by the way, not just some of us. And she will do that, but she really can't do that. I would say, at least I can't speak to relationships outside of like the typical heterosexual monogamous pattern that we're talking about here, typical for our community. So in that kind of context, if a woman tries to go on her own personal journey of addressing pain from her past, if she's with a partner who's not emotionally safe, he's constantly triggered by everything she does. I mean, you told us like every kind of foul look that your wife had, you interpreted as like, oh, what did I do now? Right. And so a woman can't go on this kind of personal transformation journey for herself when she's in a relationship like that, because she's constantly seeing a triggered man and she realizes, hey, it's not safe for me to do this. I can't really be myself. I can't really say what my internal state is like right now because you can't handle it. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. I want to get to the tipping point for you. What was the crisis that that pulled you out of this way of being to the place that where you and I met and where you discovered, hey, this isn't working for me? You want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Not. It was a stormy January in 2022. I was going out to the store to get storm supplies. It was a regular day. Everybody was in the store scrambling. Shelves were being emptied. Just a regular day. I go back home and TV was on, and there was kind of like one of the options that was showed up was like an explicit movie one. And I got kind of triggered. It's like, guys, this is the family room TV, and we have children, and we have an option over here and such. So I made a deal about it, and I used to make a big deal about these things. It was a hidden unknown trigger. It was a trigger for me, and I didn't realize it. That it always was an area, a space of fear. I end up just looking up. Go ahead.
Are you saying that, if I just understand this correctly, in your home, there was some sort of option, kind of like in a hotel, for an explicit programming of some kind.
Yeah. So I think
And you
our
did
TV
what
was
a lot of people do. A lot of people who might secretly have some sort of, dysfunction in this area will do this moral posturing, like, oh, I can't believe that's on there, right? I'm really offended, even though you might also secretly be a person watching these things. Okay.
So I wanted to do the parenting thing and look up this video, this show, and I wanted like, what would my children have seen if they were to click this on? So it was just a review, but the review itself, it was all text. There was no. I did not access an explicit site or anything, but the content was narrating what was going to be in there, and of course it was, in a way, it was discussing and summarizing explicit content, and then eventually, after my wife became aware that I was looking that up, and that started a conversation. And I evaded. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this for the kids, and made myself again, like you said, the hero. But then she probed and probed, and I disclosed to her that at some point, she point blank asked me if I ever did porn. Up to this point, 20 years in of our marriage, we had never really discussed this. I had never shared my past, and I had, or that was something I had done at one point myself way early on. And that's when things fell crashing. And she literally said, "You just shattered me." Because here's the thing, one more part of the story that maybe is very important to this whole dynamic. I'm a Muslim boy. My wife was not a Muslim, so she actually came from a background where she didn't have conserv a lot of the conservative things that ideas that I had come to. And when she came to,
I
and
didn't
she
know
got
this, by the way.
yeah. When she
Yeah.
came to Islam, she was looking for a wholesome moral way of living. And I was supposed to be that person. When she married me, I was supposed to be the person who is the good father, the righteous one, who she could trust and could take her to that new level of higher morality, where we can raise a good family and such. Fast forward later on, and she then discovers, wait, so this was part of you? A lot of things now made sense to her. She's like, all the struggles we've had were because of this. You betrayed me. You are a total betrayal. So for her, it was a calamity, and she entered a deep depression, and she struggled and I did not know how deep a woman's grief can go when she becomes disappointed in you, and she realizes that you were not the person she thought she had married all those years. And not just that, it had caused her to suffer all those years, and she had to put up with that junk and not understanding why, and why I never even decided to bring it up and be a man enough to say, hey, this was it. And she wished that way early on I would have manned up, and she would have been way more accepting if I just stood up and said the right thing and just be upfront and, let's get this fixed, let's work together, let's this, the other. But she felt that, so that was the beginning of the calamity.
Yeah,
And
this is
then
a complex topic, and I have a few women friends that I've considered maybe having on to talk about this as a panel, because this is tremendously complicated territory for a man. The reality is, you didn't tell her precisely because items like this happen, because men and women are different in how they relate to sexuality, at least at the same age range, right? And so this is like walking through a minefield for a man. To be honest about your sexuality, your struggles, and that they're just different. We see sexuality differently than women, and not in an inferior or superior sense, just different. And so, but also, this is where a woman brings her story to it. And so,
said,
most women are walking around with the same kind of shame men have, but it shows up as, I'm inadequate, I'm not enough, um, there's I'm too much or not enough, or both at the same time. And so many women encounter the discovery that a man has a sexual appetite beyond them as a direct, what's the word I'm looking for, indictment about their own value, worth, and significance. Interestingly, like, hey, I'm not enough, and this proves it. The fact that you are attracted to other women is proof that there's something wrong, or is the explanation for why our sex life has been, dissatisfying. There's a whole lot here. I've known so many men who were so bound up in this problem, but also equally couldn't really admit it, because to admit it is to put yourself in front of the moving train of a dissatisfied woman, right? In a relationship, which can blow up your family and stuff. It's tremendously complicated territory for a man to walk through.
It's actually is more complicated because a huge reason why she decided to come to Islam was that she had to escape a lifestyle where abuse of women was rampant, and it touched her particularly. Maybe on another, if it was just a general thing, it would have been different. But this was very deep, personal, and intimate to her. She of all things, abuse of women was something very, very personal to her, and to recognize that her partner may have been connected in any way was disastrous. So it's not just even casual. It's deeper, like you said. She has to bring her story to it also. And yes, so I acknowledge that.
And this is something we all do. We're always experiencing life by our personal lens, right? So just to zoom out a little bit here, I want you to see that you are experiencing your wife through your lens of shame. And so her facial expressions meant you're not enough, that you're not respected, that you're not filling her eyes, right? And she also experienced your struggles, which were about you, not her, as through her own lens, right? And this is actually what leads to marriages to crisis, is that this is what we do. We're experiencing ourselves through a reflection of our partner. So if you have really low self-worth, you're going to see it everywhere. You're going to see it at work. You're going to see it in colleagues. You're going to see it in neighbors. You're going to see it in maybe a religious leader or context. You're going to see it in your wife. And if your wife has low sense of self-worth, she's going to do likewise. And so here's what happens, right? Now you've been married for a dozen years, and you got two people who are tremendously unhappy, dissatisfied, disillusioned, and life has not gone how they thought it would. And they're also both suffering deeply with a sense of shame, judgment of themselves, judgment of one another. And this is the breaking point for marriage. This is where I meet most people anyway. Yeah.
How do you do this for a living, Sven? Superman?
No, I mean, I had my, my marriage went here too, meaning I came to my own kind of breaking point, and that's a story for another day.
I know, but I truly, I think without mentoring from your side, I don't know what would have happened. I think until I got help, it would have not been good. And yeah, we can talk about that.
How did you get from this conversation? So let's go back to your story there. What happened you had this hard conversation because your wife discovers that you're not the personification of a perfect person, that you have some dark, shadowy places within you. And no, she's discovered it. She's shattered that the version of you that she carried within her head is not the real you. And that's an important pattern, by the way, because this is one of the things we'll talk about in another discussion someday. But we all have an idealized version of our partner that we carry within our psyche or our ego. And our partner could never actually achieve that. And you have it too, right? You actually also had an idealized version of your wife, and she could never live up to it. And this is actually, it's the coming to the realization that your ideal is not something you could do.
It is a disappointment, for sure. Did you want to probe specifically into what area there?
Well, just tell us a little bit more about how that, like what happened next after she came.
What happened next? Gosh. Well, let's call it hell broke loose. It was a very confusing time. It was a time where I didn't know what sobbing was like for a man. It was a time of isolation and like the deepest level of shame ever. It was very complicated because children now are involved. Children now.
How so?
because now the children have to know the reality of their father. It became like the entire thing is crumbling. The thing that you thought you had, you're going to lose, and you have no idea what to do. And amazingly, my wife is the one who led, like always, and she knew what to do despite everything. It was just the most difficult time. She would be crying at work to the extent that she still had to go to work, but she was so broken down that it was evident that even at work, like her supervisors at work would see her crying on the side of the street outside. Like she was the happiest, most jovial school teacher out there, and she entered a state of complete loss, depression, confusion. She took action. I didn't even know where to start. I was just in shambles. I was like, she said, call your friends, call an imam, call a therapist, call it this, call it that, go do this, research that. Like, she led. I have to give her credit. I mean, Sven, ultimately, if I was to fast forward the drama, and I mean, we can go into that, the drama, the dramatic phases, and the phase. I didn't know that grief had phases, and yeah, we went through the phase of grief. She went through the phases of grief and depression. But yeah, eventually, let's call it, a lot of bad stuff happened, and then after a long time, she got to Steve Horseman's site, and she's like, check them out. And I was just like, again, the same good boy who would be like, okay, I'm gonna do what you tell me to do.
Yeah.
Whatever to make you happy. What can I do? Okay, sure, I will call it. Whatever I did was always a reaction. It wasn't like me even knowing what to do or where to start. I didn't
Just
have a
tell me
friend.
what to fix. I'll fix it.
Yeah, she's like, go tell your friends. I'm just like, me tell my friends? You're gonna tell your friends. You're gonna have to be known. It has to be known that this is what you are in reality. We're gonna tell your family. It became like, we have to figure this out. Maybe somewhere, somehow, in any of these doors you knock, we're going to find someone who can help us. That's the best thing we did. I mean, it's the most embarrassing, shame generating thing to do. But then therapies happened. I even, for a period of time, actually entered Sexaholics Anonymous because.
Yeah, this is okay. Let me pause here a minute because this is tremendously complicated. This is exactly why men hide stuff, by the way, because do you see what's happening here? And no shade on your partner. I totally understand
No, I honestly
why a
think she
woman
shook.
sees it
She
this way.
shook the world shook under her, so she had to shake the world. And
Yeah, but let me get to the point. This makes a man's, like, the desire to be intimate, like I said earlier, his longing for emotional, spiritual connection with a woman in a context of sex. This leads him to the belief that, oh, this is a dark, shameful thing about myself I have to hide. And this is one of the big problems with what empowers, interestingly, things that we might consider dark sexually, like pornography and erotic material, is because we've basically told men all these deep longings you have for intimacy, to be naked and ashamed. Oh, that's disgusting stuff, bro. You actually need to go get help. Now, I do believe we need help. We need to bring things out into the light, but this can be really confusing for a man because it's not like somebody says, hey, your longing for sexual intimacy is a good thing. There's not a thing wrong with it, but what you're doing to get there is not going to get you there. And so it turns into this, for you, it sounds like a rather public parading of hey, here's where everybody needs to know about some character defects or something, and now you're feeling more shame. And how are you supposed to move forward with that? Anyway, I'm just saying that because this is a big problem for men in trying to heal what is ultimately a wounded part of their heart. Is that that's really high stakes, by the way.
it's funny. It's like, I think it had to happen, Sven. I think facing your demons, your darkest demons, is the path. Going through hell is the path. I think you said it. Your area of most suffering is your area of most growth. Yeah, and sometimes, now looking at it back, it was the ugliest journey I've ever had in my life. I would not wish it on anyone. But I had to face the deepest alleys of shame in my life, and I know, and yeah, yeah, there's a lot to be said. So I'll let you kind of guide where you want to go from here.
Well, no, okay. So it sounds like your wife directed you to some of Steve's material. I don't remember because it's been a number of years, but did you and I meet from that?
Yeah. So he actually
Okay.
recommended I talk to you.
Okay.
And then I had my first session with you, and then I kind of lingered on a little bit. And I began to read your material, and it was like, wait a minute, this is a complete reconstruction of how my brain thinks. Eventually, I entered renewed masculine man. But to even get to your point, there was a very long, ugly phase where we tried an insanity of things between therapists, between sex therapy, between, like I said, I entered special groups. Various imams were involved in this. Friends came into my help. Family came to my help. This is where you saw who stood by your side and who, and I realized like there's a lot of good people out there. People, please don't be isolated. Everybody's actually out there to help. If you just were to open up, stop acting pious. You don't have to put on a front. Please be more human. And ever since, I have learned to be openly vulnerable. And only when I have become more openly vulnerable, and hence this podcast,
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was just like, yeah, you
and hence
couldn't be
this
more
podcast. And
more vulnerable than this.
for me, it's the only thing that now is pushing me forward. I don't know if I told you this. I think I kind of hinted at this, but now even my Muslim community is recognizing this need. And I've now been attending Muslim brothers retreats and vocally opening up on controversial topics. And when I do, without the guise of acting pious, people come to me and say, hey, I personally and privately and say like, I know what you're feeling. And it's funny that the thing that you're afraid of is the thing you need to face first.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you talking with them about shame as a result?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
so
that's
now
pretty cool, man.
Actually, I just came from a recent trip, a brothers trip, a big one. 150 brothers were out there meeting up in the mountains, and we were discussing masculinity and its different phases. And my keen interest now is to bring a lot of the learnings that I've had here through this journey and bring it to all these conservative societies. Like I think I'm starting off with my own family, my own community here, and letting them know that, hey, yeah, we have problems we need to deal with, and let's be open about it and brave enough to discuss them, because ultimately there is actually light at the end of the tunnel if you are willing to do the work, if you are willing to own things and do something about them.
So here's a question that comes up for me because, I'm a person who likes to collaborate. I'm curious. We've never talked about this before, but as a conservative Muslim, was there anything hard about going through my mentoring program?
Not at all. Not at all. As a matter of fact, I began seeing the spiritual guidance that I always just took in passing as like, oh yeah, that's became my new thing. It's like, how can I put the two on top of each other? And I found a lot of parallels. It actually was completely in sync. All the readings that we've had, even the books that you shared, I don't think anything was in contradiction. I think it was exactly what the spiritual guidance was telling us to do, except we never saw it with that lens. I noticed one thing, Sven. I think there is that we do two things based on, you can do anything based on two ways. You can do anything based on, this is a chore and a task I gotta do, or I'm doing this from my heart. If you're reading scripture and you're taking it as a chore, you're looking at it from that lens. It's kind of like, again, the boy who's like asked to take the trash can out. So for you, you can get guidance and just like huff and puff and do. And that applies everywhere. If you're doing things from the heart, where I'm being actually intentional and sincere, it's a different way of doing things. And when you start focusing there, and breathing comes into that, and mindfulness comes into that,
yeah,
the things are different.
Well, thanks for telling me that. That's interesting. It's been really complicated at times to try to cultivate a program that works for anybody in any cultural background. And of course, I keep trying to refine it, but I like to ask that question because I have quite a few people that are secular. They might call themselves agnostics or atheists, go through that program. I like to find out the same for them. Like, hey, was this weird for you? I've had Orthodox Jews take the program, secular Jews, evangelicals, Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, Latter-day Saints. There's been pretty much everybody, the full spectrum. And so I'm always curious, like, hey, was there any friction points for you
I'll tell you.
And so this is actually really kind of nice to hear that you were able to take that and feel like, hey, that worked for me. I didn't feel like I had to give up my heritage or my identity to do this.
It's all because it's all rooted in the ego. The ego is your ultimate enemy, or at least your biggest adversary and your biggest hindrance.
Let's say
And
opportunity. Yeah.
your biggest opportunity to overcome. Yes. I
Yes.
think that's what you wrestle with most. That you're wrestling with your version of the ego of what you are. And I think all spiritual faiths agree with that. I don't think I think any moral standard will always, or any standard for purity will always focus on the ego, recognizing that. So I think that's where we all connect.
You know what? That and the heart, just to put this in
And the
contrast
heart,
for the
100%,
listener, is
100%. The ego and the counter to it, which is the heart, 100%.
What our mentoring journey focuses on is this dualistic experience that humans have between, you might say, head and heart, brain and heart, ego and heart, but just one part of us that we recognize, hey, these longings are good. There's a part of me that wants to be good, that has a longing for, you might say it a religious way, righteousness, right? And then there's this part of me that struggles to do that. And it doesn't matter what your worldview is, we all seem to have that common human experience. So that's really what I've tried to design the curriculum around, is so that that's something we can all kind of coalesce around as a common human experience without it touching any, deep triggers about maybe the dogma that we all come from in some way or shape or form. So yeah, thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, agree.
And of course, you're welcome to use those tools to help these men you're encountering. I hope it
comes out in conversation. I think now I've learned to challenge folks. I've challenged myself. So now I ask probing questions more often, and they're kind of similar to like, are you sure this is where it's coming from? Type thing. So yeah, I don't, maybe not formally, and I've always wasn't sure or hesitated to kind of take from your slides and actually make that material. But I think the concept and the gist of it is what we communicate.
Yeah, the concepts are fine. I don't care if they know who I am or whatnot. That's not really the point. But I was curious if you've had to recontextualize it in some way.
Yeah, I do. Sometimes I do. I have to kind of find sometimes I have to find a spiritual backing to it or support for it. More often than not, the material is just very basic, Sven. I think it's just our inner struggle with our humanity. I think I would say the vast majority of the content is like you trying to figure out what you really want. Are you really clear about why you're doing something? And is it coming from a good place?
Cool. Okay, so your wife put you in touch in a long roundabout way. Somehow you got in my material, and you started a mentoring program. I don't really want the focus of this conversation to be the material, the curriculum. I'm more interested in the man listening, understanding what the shifts were. SHIFTS, shifts. I realize if I don't enunciate that, it could sound a little bit weird. This place that was, hey, this isn't working for me in life, to a new place. And so maybe we could jump into that a little bit. Hey, this is Sven. I hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Masterful Man podcast. We're taking a quick break, and in the meantime, I've got a question for you. Are you feeling stuck? Not just tired, but like something in you is quietly fading? Like the tools that used to work, grit, performance, logic, aren't cutting it anymore? If that hits home, I wrote something for you. It's called The First Steps Out of Stuck, a straight-talking guide for men ready to reclaim their power in life, love, and leadership. And you can grab it free right now at guides.masterful.men. Again, that's guides.masterful.men. Let this be the moment you stop waiting and start creating. Now let's get back to today's conversation. Okay, so you said your wife put you in touch with, in a roundabout way, with my material through Steve's material. And you started a mentoring program, and I don't really want to focus on the specifics of the program. This isn't a commercial for Masterful Man or Sven Masterson or whatnot. But really what I want to focus on is what happened in your life in that mentoring process, specifically, Mohamed. What shifts took place in your understanding, in your thinking, in your insights, in these areas that we've talked about so far?
Yeah.
Like, what happened?
Gosh, I just kind of felt that in the heart. I don't know why. It's just like, bow. The two words that just jumped out of my mind or my heart, I don't know. Acceptance and unconditional high regard. Self-acceptance, or maybe just, well, acceptance, and under acceptance, there's self-acceptance, and acceptance of her, acceptance of the fate, acceptance. It's a big bundle. Just accept the universe, accept where you are, accept that where you are here was meant to be all along, and you are okay, and everything is okay despite what you think is happening. Now, that is reverse thinking. What do you mean everything is okay? Everything is absolutely, quote unquote, not okay. But life is messy. Acceptance was one thing, but now the next step beyond acceptance to me was unconditional high regard.
Okay, well, hold on.
That,
Before you move on from
yeah,
acceptance, because, just a moment ago, we were talking about this crisis where all of your secrets, it sound like were kind of drug out in front of a community, a family, of friends. Your wife is saying, you've got to fix this. That sounds like a pretty anxious time to be talking about acceptance. So I'm just
yeah,
curious
yeah,
if you could unpack that a
of
little bit.
course, of course.
How did you find acceptance?
Oh.
What does that even mean, Mohammed, for the man listening? What does that mean? Like in the middle of a crisis, most people are thinking, well, acceptance is what takes care of that. I mean, I know where you're coming from, but I'm curious if you could unpack that for our listener a little bit.
Okay. There was a lot that was going on. I was going through my own depression, which to my wife was inconceivable. You were going through depression? I'm the one going through depression. How could you be depressed? It's your fault. But of course, when you only been slapped with that much shame at one dose, that type of nuclear bomb of shame for already person who's suffering already from that, it kind of knocks them out. So I went to a psychiatrist, and then I was given doses of antidepressants. I got larger and larger doses of it. I think close to the max eventually. Um, um, then in that journey, in talking to folks and such, and then eventually when I got landed with you, I learned that despite of everything, it is okay. There is the concept of a hero's journey. There is the concept of the old world, and then there's the concept of the calling, and then there's the concept. So I found hope. I found in the brotherhood that I was connecting with in the calls that there are other people who are suffering, and sometimes even in bigger problems than myself. I am not the biggest problem in the world. It took a lot. It took a circle of humans to tell me I'm okay, not just one person. It took an imam to tell me I'm going to be okay. It took a friend to tell me I'm going to be okay. It took a brother, be it my blood brother, who stood by my side to tell me I'm okay. It took many people to tell me I'm okay for me to believe I'm okay. And I still was struggling with that thought. And sometimes you still struggle with that thought. I mean, I think it's a constant muscle you have to exercise. But then I realized that I had the permission. I think this is another language that I didn't even know to use. Yes, you are permitted, despite of everything, and despite of all of that, and that you still have a breath in you, God still is there. There is a universality of purpose and mission that you could be going through a season. That's another language I didn't even know. You're going through a season right now, and seasons come and go. So just the glimmer of hope is what kept me going, and the permission to accept that I was not the worst creature ever. And then there was repentance as a path. My wife herself told me that wouldn't it be amazing if one day, she was listening to another podcast someday, actually interesting, it just came to mind. And she's like, you see how that guy conquered that challenge there? It would be amazing if one day, I actually did not remember that until just this moment. So I did not do this podcast because of that podcast. But it just came to me that, whoa, I think I'm in that position now where, you see, it'd be amazing if you could make a turn in your life. Uh, and I realized,
Are you,
wait, she could actually accept me if I changed. You see where it was coming from? Still getting validation. So I will accept myself if she is willing to accept me later on. But that was kind of how, at least for a bit, I got some level of acceptance of like, okay, Level 1 acceptance.
Are you saying that, if I understood that story correctly, she was kind of daydreaming about maybe a future where you've turned a corner and you're on a podcast?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
because she was at the time we were listening to a lot of podcasts, we were reading a lot of material, we were trying a lot of things, and there was another person who was struggling with something kind of in a way similar, because we were really reading and listening to material about similar things, and betrayal was a huge part of the literature she was consuming. She joined, betrayal groups and
Yeah.
betrayal podcasts, and there was a phase, an early phase where that was happening, and she saw people turn the corner. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, but betrayal too, that could be a little bit tricky, and I'll revisit that just for a
yes.
moment, because a man listening might not understand why betrayal.
Hmm.
And again, I'm not a female, but remember how I mentioned we have this perception of what our partner should be in our mind. You have one for your wife has one for you.
Hmm.
For a lot of people to discover that you're not that, and in fact you may be way different than that, to many women it will be experienced just like infidelity. And this is very confusing to men, because men will be like, hey, I didn't cheat. But that's not how women see the world. So like,
Correct.
a woman will see really any expression of sexual energy, if you have committed to her to be, monogamous and committed, then any sexual energy you give to anything outside of that, to many women,
Yes.
not all, will be viewed
Absolutely.
as
Absolutely.
infidelity, a breach of trust, betrayal, and so that's what we mean. Uh, we all have to kind of come to our own perspective, right? I don't believe that you necessarily need to agree to appreciate that perspective. I think most men could say, well, that feels a little bit unfair, because men make a distinction between what they actually do in action and they're more of their animalistic nature. And men's animalistic nature in their flesh, at least sexually, it's just way different than it is for many women. And again, I'm not,
Yeah.
maybe I'm painting too broad of a brush, but I'm trying to speak generally, because there's a lot of people that will be listening who'd be confused by this. But you
Yeah.
didn't betray, from your perspective, I would think you would say, you didn't have an affair, you didn't cheat, you didn't
Right.
give sexual attention or energy to a real live human being. But the fact that you fantasize, that you engage with erotic material to your wife, was experienced as betrayal. And that's unarguable. Just to be clear to a listener, we don't get to tell other people that how they are experiencing life is right or wrong. They experience it the way they experience it.
Yeah.
It's not our need or our job to validate or invalidate it, because by the same token, how you experience your life is also not arguable to another human being.
Yeah.
So,
And
um, just to
and you just
just to set the record
and you
straight
just
there.
mentioned it. It's the acceptance of that. It's the acceptance that
Yeah.
she can have her experience and I hold no judgment to it. That was
Right.
unconceivable. Also, like,
Yeah.
I accept that that's her world. All that was vocabulary and thinking ways that I was not equipped with. Absolutely. How could you, how would you know these things? One thing that came about in this conversation of betrayal, which also was very important in how I rewired my brain and thinking. Shame was a place where I would go and feel some form of martyrdom, and the sulking energy that I would have, where it would be like look at me, woe is me type thing. Until I read in one of the betrayal literature is that shame is actually reverse arrogance. You are so arrogant that I am beyond being called such, that there's two ways to arrogance can take two forms: the pompous external form, but there's an internal dark form, which is that energy that you're going to explode out and say, how could you touch me? I am untouchable. I am this. There's an external form of arrogance, but again, maybe we haven't spoken about this, Sven, but it was a very interesting mindset shift to say, wait a minute, stop your shame, because that's just being arrogant, just in the opposite direction, the negative
Well,
form, the dark form of arrogance. And that, I don't know what you think about that, but
yeah,
that hit
actually,
me. And I was like, wait a minute, shame is arrogance? That just counterintuitive, but blew my mind and was important for me to realize, dude, cut it off, knock it out. Nah, stop
I
sulking.
would
I don't know
I
what
would
you think. I've never
articulate.
never heard your input on that.
Here's how I would say what I think you're saying, but in Sven speak, just to maybe make it a little bit more precise. I define shame as really any conclusion that I'm not enough, that something is fundamentally wrong with me or might be wrong with me. Or shame as otherwise, I am or might be a bad thing. Okay. Now, what I think you're describing in king, warrior, magician, lover terms is let's zero in on the warrior archetype. Okay, the warrior archetype has shadows called the masochist and the sadist. The sadist is an outward punishing other people use of warrior-esque kind of energy. And the masochist is the self-punishing, fall on my sword, I'm a martyr, woe is me, look at all I'm sacrificing. And I believe those are both two sides of the same dysfunction, the ego. So one part of our ego does kind of flamboyantly sulk, look at all of the punishment I'm punishing myself with. Some people might label that shame. I don't know that it's legitimate shame, meaning it's not truly a belief that I'm a bad thing. It's a belief that if I show you how bad of a thing I am, you'll feel bad for me and value me, right? So,
Yeah, I think it's
yeah.
kind of like, yeah.
Where arrogance is the other side of that coin, which is if I tell you how awesome I am, you'll just believe it, right? But both of those are egoic shadows.
Correct.
Of king, warrior, magician, lover. I think we're saying the same thing. I'm just saying it maybe with a little bit different terminology. The kind of, and the reason I'm making that distinction is the shame that's more of like the common human condition we're talking about is a legitimate belief, meaning it's not fake, it's not a strategy, it's a real abiding belief that I might be a bad thing. It's an uncertainty. It's not, you're not even expressing it to other people. It's the belief that like, yeah, I think something's just wrong with me. It might be, you could say it as inadequacy, the belief I'm too much, the belief I'm not enough. I don't know that the words necessarily matter here. We all kind of have our own unique story. But if you walk around believing something is wrong with you, you really can't flourish as a human being. If your fundamental core belief about yourself is that something is wrong with you, you lose the basis to trust yourself. And if I can't trust myself because I believe part of me is dark, how on earth can I be in a relationship with somebody and say you can trust me?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So the next level, I think, was that once you accepted, you're absolutely right. Trust became the next level, because how can I trust what I do not accept? So that was another aspect of kind of the understanding of what it means to be mature is I always trusted, my trust was in the reaction of someone's validation. It was never, no, I trust what I just did. And I'm okay with the consequences for better or for worse. So you have to start with acceptance. But self-trust was a fundamental thing. There were some things that I trusted myself in. Like I trusted that if I entered a hacking competition, I might be a winner because I just knew it. I just knew what I was good at. And I knew what I wasn't. When it came to relationship and life, I did not trust myself. I did not trust where I was coming from. And for me, I trusted more what my employer told me about me rather than what I thought what I was or what my wife told me about me. Trust was the other thing.
And I would say that's I believe a symptom of shame is that you look to others to tell you about yourself because your own perception of self is not so good.
Yeah.
One thing I want to just clarify, again, not for your sake, but for the listener, is that most men tend to be very confused about the difference between acceptance and approval. But
Yeah.
I'm not talking about approval.
Yes. Yes.
Approval is I see and I accept as my own your perspective. That's what approval would be. But acceptance is just saying, you know what, it's cloudy outside today, and I'm going to let go of the belief that it needs to be sunny because it's not.
Yeah.
It's rainy. I don't have to like rainy days. I don't have to glory in rainy days. But acceptance is looking and saying, you know, so it is.
Can I share?
Yeah, please do.
One of the first things I heard you, and I still remember the visual, the very first encounter you and I had, the first session that you had with me, one-on-one personal call and video, is in terms of acceptance. I remember you putting your, both your hands next to each other there and saying, like, both of you at this point have guns pointed towards each other.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And you are going to have to lower that gun until she realizes she's safe enough that you're not pointing at her anymore, and then she will lower her gun. That was a fundamental shift in my thinking, and in accepting that, oh, really? I didn't realize that I had a gun pointed. I thought I was a victim here. But when I realized that my behavior or the way I was coming across was that, and nobody in therapy told me that. Nobody ever. Like for the year before that, I went through so much conversation. That one visual just was so powerful to me that I realized, oh, I have to accept that in this encounter, in this confrontation between, but this two-way path, I had to kind of disarm and accept and be brave enough and bold enough to say, you know what, it was the beginning of, I think, courage to just lay down arms. And when you accept that, whatever it is you're going to face, you're going to still be okay. If you die in the
It's very
process,
difficult.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, yeah. I mean, if you die in the process, maybe then we could call you a martyr. I don't know, but you're, more often than not, you will not die in the process, and you actually will realize that when you disarm yourself, she will begin to feel, okay, well, I don't need to arm myself either, and that actually happened.
But not at
So
first, because what you're
not, it took a
describing.
while. It took a while, a long while, but
I
she
I
eventually
talked
trusted.
to I talk to men about. I still use the same metaphor about a standoff, and because what you're describing or what I had described to you is what I would call typical marital gridlock. All marriages will eventually come to a gridlock where you're both so mutually disappointed with each other and distrustful of each other and hurt. And what you're really encountering is you're coming to the end of the version of you that couldn't get you to this through the second half of life. We're all kind of experiencing our immature selves, right? And marriage is a place where that happens. So we do our best to try to think of marriage as all love and romance, but marriage is a maturity machine. That's what it is. And you don't start marriage out generally as mature people. Not your first marriage
They
anyway.
told me
So
that.
well, me either, right? So
They
so
said it was going to be a fun machine.
it, it does get that way, but not until you go through this gridlock. So in
Yes.
this gridlock phase, this is where most marriages end. It'll either spit you out or it'll mature you, right? And so you'll get in this gridlock where you feel like you have a gun at each other's head. What makes it especially hard is someone has to go first in disarming. And I would advocate that this ought to be the man, right? Now, the problem is when you decock the gun and you put it in your holster, generally what happens at first is you hear because she doubles down on it, and it really feels like you're going to get shot in the head by this angry woman, and you just disarmed yourself. And this is what makes it so challenging to do is it really is an act of faith. And I don't mean that in a religious sense, but faith being to take action before the evidence is there that it works. And this is why it's so dang hard for people, is because a guy like me is saying, holster your weapon. And you're like, yeah, but she's got a gun to my head. And when I put it in the holster, she gets worse. I know. I've been there.
But also, that also means you're ready to lose it all. That also means you're ready to lose it all. Like, don't obsess. I think that was another mind shift. Don't obsess over saving your marriage. Focus on yourself. Get your act together. The marriage could, may not follow. that dismantling of thought was as a mind shift. Like,
Yeah.
wait, what do you mean that my only sole purpose is to make this continue? And when you just let go and say, don't worry about the marriage right now, you're like, what do you mean don't worry about the marriage right
It's
now?
counterintuitive, but
Worry about yourself. Become the man that is worthy of the marriage, and then the marriage will follow, or the man of the version of you will decide whether it should or not. So,
right. It's very hard for most men to understand that in the moment, that you have to be willing to lose it. But this is an idea that's common in lots of faiths. It's common in general. You can even watch the Star Wars movies and come to this understanding that, because I think one of the best teachers on attachment is actually Yoda. Um,
I love Yoda.
Attachment leads to suffering in the long run. And
Yes, yeah.
if you want a great marriage, you actually have to detach from staying married. It doesn't. People hear that, they think I'm advocating for getting rid of marriage. I just celebrated my 33rd dating anniversary
Man.
with my wife on
Congratulations.
the other day.
Congrats.
Right?
How expensive was the ring?
It wasn't very expensive. So here's the thing. Oh, you mean the 33rd anniversary ring?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the platinum, I don't know, Jubilee. No. I don't know what.
We didn't do that. She got me beef jerky, chocolate covered walnuts, and something else. I don't know. But the only reason I could have that milestone with Zelda was because it's been a while now. Yeah, about 7 or 8 years ago now, I became willing to let my marriage die. And I didn't do that so that I could feel good about letting it die. I did it because I realized that in all my efforts of clinging to making it work, that wasn't working. It didn't make it work. It made me hedge my bets. It made me avoid conflict. It made me avoid being truthful and honest. A lot of things, right? So when I started just going extremely high stakes, like, hey, this could totally blow my marriage up, that's when my marriage improved. And so that's what we're talking about here, is letting go of needing your life to turn out a certain way. You have to be able to play this game of marriage and life at absolutely high stakes. If you're trying to stay safe, you will not become an intimate person. This is very, very hard to accept. If you want to be safe, you can't be intimate, because if you want to be safe, you will not be vulnerable and authentic. And without authenticity and vulnerability, there is no such thing as intimacy.
Yeah, I don't know why.
This is hard.
I don't know why enmeshment and codependency just kind of bubbles up in my mind about this. Like, I think sometimes we don't realize that marriages kind of foster that type of relationship where we could get so enmeshed that we cannot, that we think that becomes a purpose.
That's what leads
operate.
You to the standoff is a direct consequence of that codependent enmeshment, which is I would say, as a person who talks to marriages every day, that codependency and enmeshment is a natural thing that happens in what I call your first version of the marriage, right? Again, I've been in a long-term relationship. I would still say I had a version 1 of my marriage, and I have version 2. And version 1 had to end, and it ended when I decided to blow it up by saying this doesn't work, and it ended in that standoff that you talked about.
Yeah.
Because when you're codependent and enmeshment, you're basically two people vying for who gets to be whole. And you're living in a story where there's not enough to go around. And so I can't be whole because I need it from you. And your partner's saying, well, I can't be whole because you're screwing something up, right? So there's no way forward if two people are looking to the other person for their resolution, for their hero, right? And that's when you have to kind of break that gridlock and say, hey, I'm going on my own journey. And it's not about marriage anymore. It's about me. And a lot of people, especially people from conservative backgrounds, have been taught that that's selfish to do that, right? You can't go on your own journey. Good luck.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going. Didn't mean to hijack that thread.
No. I'm out of ideas right now. I think I dumped it all.
Okay, so you got to acceptance. Surprisingly, we haven't had any real deep conversations yet about unconditional high regard on this podcast, even though it's like a pillar of our the masterful
It was
community.
the other part of it. It was the next level, right?
Talk to us about that. Tell us, acceptance.
Okay.
Explain to us. Explain what you mean by unconditional high regard
So
and how that plays in here.
it all begins with awareness. I think in the cloud of whatever it is you're going through in your first phase of marriage, where everything for you is a simple binary transaction and you don't see it, you're just not aware of yourself. That we men, many of us, lack awareness of why we do things. And uh, unconditional means there is no condition behind what you're doing. I did not know what that meant. Like, I love my kids, but I didn't think perhaps maybe you have to put me in a crisis where I have to go sacrifice my life and then realize, oh, I'm going to go jump in front of the truck to save my kid, and that's unconditional. I think, but other than in crisis conditions like that, you don't realize that the day-to-day activities that you do, be it clean the kitchen, sweep the floor, do the laundry, ask yourself, am I truly being sincere in this action, or is there a part of me here that's actually seeking something? Now, high regard, so that's the conditional aspect of somebody who's living in a world where everything is a conditional thing. Now, unconditional high regard, in my processing and understanding, is beyond acceptance. Now I accept my wife, I accept her reactions. The regard aspect is where I may be completely disagreeing with you right now. You may not be in your best shape, your best self, your best face right now, your best, version of yourself. But I will continue to exercise intentionally, unconditional regard for you as a human being, as a person who I've loved. As a matter of fact, I will actually love you. I may not love the action, the behavior you're doing right now, but I will mindfully love you because I know there's a version of you that I fell in love with. There's a version of you that truly, if I was to go into your soul and kind of past those black clouds and delve past the hurt and past the wound and past the bleeding, and when all this is healed, you're at the core such a beautiful person. And for you to kind of see past that when all you're getting is like, wah, you're getting this beams of rays of heat, that's actually just, maybe it's just the thorns on a rose, that you've encountered. You've just encountered the thorn, and you're saying roses suck. I hate you. No, I think if you can see the rose from the thorns, that might be a way to understand unconditional high regard. A rose is beautiful. Now there are aspects of it that, hey, if you go to the wrong places, or if you trigger trigger the wrong, aspects of the rose, you're going to see the other side of the rose. But nobody can argue that a rose is not a model of beauty, for example. And the feminine, I think, could lend itself to that analogy, I feel.
Let me add one thing. I love what you said there. All beautiful things. Unconditional high regard is a regard. Here's how I define it. It's a regard I give someone else that's not rooted in them but me. Right? So if you have to take the reasons you regard somebody from them, well, then they're ultimately responsible for how you treat them.
Right.
And to some people, they're like, yeah, well, what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with that is then I'm not exercising any power and agency in who I like to be in the world. So
I love you if you're nice to me. I don't love you if you're bad. I only love you when you're good to me.
I like to say this metaphor. Suppose I walk up to you and you hand me $10 and I put it in my wallet and I take it right back out. I'm like, here. And I have this generous, smug look on my face like I'm some sort of great guy because I just gave you $10. But you just gave it to me. So imagine saying that you were generous because you just gave somebody back what they gave to you. But that's how a lot of people try to love other people, regard other people. They just gave back what they gave them. There's nothing especially strong about that. But when somebody is not giving you any tangible reason to give them regard, then you get to ask the question, well, who do I like to be? Who do I want to be? Because it's like who I like to be, not because you deserve it or don't deserve it, but because I like to be this version of Mohamed in the world. So, but to do that, you also have to be able to source in something other than the recipient. And this is the true gift of unconditional high regard, because you cannot show someone else that kind of regard unless you're accustomed to showing yourself that kind of regard. And that's the real gift.
Hmm.
And I don't want to steal your thunder if you're going to this, but
No, no, no. I actually
what
wanted to hear this. I needed to hear
what
that.
what ultimately heals a marriage is two people coming to a sense of healing. And well, what is personal healing? Healing is when you turn towards yourself and you start regarding yourself unconditionally. That means you take away all of the check boxes
Yeah.
that you use to give yourself acceptance, because that version of conditional self acceptance is driving you in and out of shame spirals, contempt for yourself, loathing, the belief that you're unworthy. And so when you live in a constant up and down of regard for yourself, you're not a person that can be trusted by yourself or anybody else, right? So the thing that this crisis does is it puts a human being in a place where they have to discover, hey, my relationship with myself, it sucks, it's horrible.
Yeah.
And how do I fix that? And you fix it with this unconditional high regard for yourself. And I'm going to stop
Actually,
there and let you unpack that,
no,
because
no. I really am grateful that you brought this up because I'll admit it is something that with time you could go back to old ways of doing things. And maybe in a certain phase, I was more actively giving myself first unconditional high regard, and that helped me. But it's easy to regress too. And I needed to hear this reminder that for me to continue to be a stable partner in this type of relationship, I have to start with unconditional high regard for myself, like accept myself, but also stop and actively never look at myself as a checklist of things that have been done before I value myself, that I am beyond that, and focus my attention on the bigger worth of me, independent of the things that I do. And when I can do that, then I can also see that, the person from the behavior, like stop, the behaviors, the things that we do are independent of the person that we are. Start with yourself first and then exercise the same to the loved one.
yeah, you could make a synonym here and say that unconditional high regard for yourself is to have unconditional self-worth.
Yes.
If you
Yeah.
have unconditional self-worth, then you're basically confessing that you start from a place of self-worth, and then your behavior will flow out of a person who believes they have self-worth. A conditional
Yeah.
self-worth flips all that around, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now you don't believe you have worth, so your behavior is actually oriented to try to secure a sense of worth. And now
Hmm.
your behavior is all dysfunctional, it's manipulative, it's controlling, it's erratic, because it's just a grasping to try to find a sense of identity and personhood and worth. And so this is why I believe we have this moment, is to come to this place where we realize, like, hey, this conditional self-worth does not work. Um,
True.
there's no path forward for me but being pragmatic, unreliable, erratic, because I'm shifty all the time in that way of living. And when I switch to unconditional self-worth, that flips it all on its head.
100%. Totally agree.
So you had these shifts. How do they impact you as a person? This acceptance,
Well,
unconditional high
here's
regard.
the first thing. Um, I'm terrified of confrontation. I'm terrified of, well, I've been. I used to. I'd be very scared to see her in her emotional state. But I also learned that I've got to be the rock. So I also learned that stonewalling and running away is not the way. I've learned that I've got to step up, be the man, and go straight to the fire and be ready there to take a deep breath and sit there and exercise that unconditional high regard to myself first, and then in a conversation, if I realize, and then to her, and listen to her, and suspend judgment. So it helps with coming back, manning up, and being available to accept her as she is, listen to her, contemplate it. And sometimes a side effect of unconditional high regard to myself is if I find that she's crossed the border of respect, I have to also stand up for myself and say, I'm sorry. The conversation has taken us to a point where now it's it's not productive. It's actually now it's going to start hurting us, hurting me. Now it's crossing my boundary of what I accept as suitable to me, and we need to take a break. So that navigating that tense dynamic make it possible, and it facilitated conversations. And more often than not, it was the way things became resolved. Instead of us sulking for 3 days, 4 days, just not able to talk, stonewalling, and just kind of now I have the guts to go back up and say and face it and say, listen, I want to hear you. And I let her exercise and go through her states and accept man up to it. If I need my time to process it, I will also exercise unconditional high regard to myself and say, I think I need to think about this, contemplate it, and come back. But it assisted in that process moving forward. So that was huge. Dealing with confrontation, dealing with navigating tense things, and even owning up to maybe not showing up the way I wanted to, because now I can say, hey, I hold myself with high regard to have behaved in this way. I slipped. I didn't know. I was weak. Owning that and coming back to her and sharing my humanity too, in a way, was actually something that she respected a lot. And she, in the same process, also grew to feel safer to share her world, knowing that I'm not going to go bounce back at her. Now, I'm not saying every conversation is always this beautiful interplay, right? They're messy still, they're ugly, but it's still a storm. There's no storm that begins with rainbows. I think all storms.
That's a quote right there.
I think storms have to happen first. You have to be the rock or the lighthouse. You have to visualize that. You have to embody that. You have to be that, and then look out for that rainbow because it's coming if you can just hold on.
I love what you've unpacked here for us on a lot of levels. The first is one of the first yeah buts we get from any man when we talk about unconditional high regard is he thinks we're saying be a doormat. But interestingly, you just demonstrated, and I'm going to unpack a little bit, that the only way not to be a doormat is to have unconditional high regard for yourself. But you're also going to have that naturally for your partner. So here's what I mean. Unconditional high regard for your partner is not unconditional presence. It's not unconditional relationship. It's not unconditional commitment. It's regard. But because you start with it for yourself, that gives you the ability to be okay. It gives you the ability to own your bullshit because you recognize, well, I can own my mistakes because my mistakes are not an indication of my value and worth. They're just an indication of my behavior. And I can admit that to myself and to someone else with confidence because I know my value and worth is unconditional. That's how unconditional high regard prepares you with a stable foundation to be present and to endure a hard conversation. But then it shows up again and where you say, wait a minute, I matter, right? I have unconditional value and worth, just as the person does that's talking with me. And I can't keep going in this right now because it's getting degrading to me. So I'm not. So you actually demonstrated how unconditional high regard is the basis for solid boundaries for yourself. And so even though men are thinking we're saying being a doormat, the irony is when men start to walk their lives out with unconditional high regard for themselves and others, they develop superior boundaries, excellent boundaries. They stop avoiding conflict. They stop being a doormat because a person who doesn't have value and worth is the one who's allowing themselves to be a doormat because they're afraid not to be.
I was told that directly. As a matter of fact, she respects when she sees that I have high regard for myself, because otherwise she'll keep pushing to see how far I can. Where are my limits? Do you even respect yourself? How can I respect you if you don't respect yourself? So, you've never seen a lighthouse shift location. It stands there, right? The storm crashes against it. It's just there. Um, so it doesn't decide to shrink. It doesn't decide to shift left or right. It's just there. So to the extent that we can embody that, then the storm respects it. She respects it, and she knows not to. She knows when she's crossed the line. It's actually feedback necessary for her because she needs to know to be self. It's actually helpful for her to be aware that she's crossed the line. She may not actually be aware, so she needs to be aware, and you can help her uh,
And
be aware.
and you did take away your regard. That's the important thing. Because again, high regard here is unconditional. What you take away is something that is conditional in a relationship, right? Like physical presence. My physical presence is not unconditional with you or anybody else, with my wife, right? If you're going to be hostile, you don't get my physical presence. You don't get my emotional support if you're hostile. I don't change the way my heart is towards you because that's unconditional as part of high regard. I'm still going to be warm. I'm still going to be compassionate. Still going to be curious. Still going to have empathy. Still going to be understanding because that's who I like to be. That's part of unconditional high regard for me. But my partnership, my emotional support, my sexual attention, my financial support, there's a lot of things that are conditional, which I give them as part of a commitment to a common reciprocal relationship, right? And so sometimes those get retracted momentarily because, hey, the way you're behaving does not work for me, and
Right.
and vice versa, right? I don't expect my wife to give me her unconditional presence, her unconditional sexual attention, right? And so just making that distinction, realizing that healthy marriages have both. They have I would say, a foundation of unconditional high regard, but you also have to be really clear for yourself. What do you do because it's unconditional high regard, and what do you do as a part of a committed conditional relationship? And so what typically happens in the first half of marriage, just again, this is for the listener, is you're conditional about the wrong things and you're unconditional about the wrong things. So
Yeah.
what people tend to have is conditional regard and unconditional relationship. And that's a complete train wreck in a relationship because you'll have poor boundaries. You'll be dishonest. You'll be inauthentic. You'll be conditionally warm.
True.
You'll be
Yeah.
unwilling to show your partner regard
Yeah.
just because of their humanity, and you'll be highly transactional, etc.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that you can look outside like you're doing the same thing, but inside you're totally different. A prior me would be sitting in that confrontation, just sitting there and internally brewing and stewing, brewing and with complete disdain to what's happening and completely pointing at her. And maybe I wouldn't verbalize anything. If you would look at me, you would say like, wow, he's quiet, he's stoic, he's taking it in. What's happening inside is an implosion that's coming from very toxic places. But you can the same picture. If you just take a snapshot, it might look. Although I would still argue, even your physical embodiment of this actually will still be different. But generally, you will see that a second person is sitting there, in a more evolved state of mind. They will actually be okay. Their shoulders will be relaxed. They will be breathing consciously. They may still be quiet, just like the first guy, but they will not be with toxic thoughts in their minds at all. I think they will just be in like curious mode. It's like, I think she's upset right now, and like I'm really curious what's behind it, and not take a thing personal. Like to the extent you take things personal is to the extent you're still, you know, needing to heal. To the extent of you're curious in a loving way, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's just the sound, that's just the way it's coming out right now. But there's a pain, like, it's kind of like when somebody comes to the ER and they're like screaming, the nurse is not like commenting on like, hey, you've hit decibel level this. They're like, I really want to know, like, is it the sprain or is it like the knee? Like, is it the wound? They're really,
Yeah.
really focused on like the thing behind the noise. They don't care actually about the noise, but we, can easily get caught up in that part. The filter.
Yeah. You can't be curious unless you're secure. That's one thing I think that's
Yeah.
worth saying. Um, when you're insecure within your self-worth, you lose the ability to be curious in that moment because your brain is ultimately going to be focused on trying to make yourself feel secure.
Right.
So this
Yeah.
is why the path to fixing a marriage and a relationship is ultimately to work on a man's self-acceptance, because it gives him a restoration of empathy and curiosity and whatnot, which is our natural state, I would suggest, as children. And we lose that when we become insecure. And so we become focused on the preoccupation with fixing our an existential dread of sorts. So you've described having gone through all kinds of modalities, all kinds of different help. Um, what was different for you in just your process of learning these things? Like tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about how these concepts and the
Yeah.
environment, I suppose, to a degree,
Yeah.
like how did things start to turn around for you, Mohammed?
Yeah. One word: ownership. Absolute ownership. I think you've it was maybe slide one of your material. 100% ownership. All the modalities I've gone through always made her part of it, part of the problem. Oh, you guys are going to do this 50-50. She's going to have to do this, and then you're going to have to do that. You guys, here's a cheat sheet, read this. Oh, you're going to do this, and she's going to do that. There was nothing she had to do with when it came to a man owning his crap. It was, don't even worry about her. Don't worry about the marriage. Don't worry about the kids. Worry about yourself. Um, so that was a fundamental shift. It's like, wait, it's all on me. And then when you start owning it and never having to look outside and just constantly say like, wait, what, just introspect first. It's a huge shift. So I would say that was fundamental.
Yeah, this is what we get the most complaints about, by the way. If it weren't for ownership, I think there'd be a lot of people that were pretty curious to come into our community. But that is, it's really off-putting for a lot of men because they don't like this idea that I've got to go focus on me. They want to know first, well, I won't do that until I know she's going to do her stuff, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, just what that was like to kind of overcome some of those worries of like, well, what's going to happen if I stop fiddling with my marriage and trying to get her to change and things like that?
I think ownership meant I had to take action, independent of whether she approved or disapproved. Ownership meant I'm ready to make mistakes and I will own the side effects and it's okay. And I'm willing to lose it all. Ownership means that if I make the wrong decision, so what? Don't be afraid. Just make a decision. Stop being afraid of what she will say. Just own it. It don't matter. And it's a very hard thing to say, but I can't believe I'm saying this now. It's don't you have to if really dig deep and figure out what is it, what the heck do you want? Like what do you really want? And why do you want it? And just be very clear. And to the extent that you're messed up is the extent that you're not clear about what's happening inside of you. That's exactly it. If you're confused, I think you've said it best. I think of others. My imam said it many times. Men who think more than they act will forever remain confused. There's no ever way of you ever knowing 100% of all the outcomes that will happen. You got to enter the cave before scanning it with 3D imaging before you identify all the threats. It's dark, it's scary, but you might find a treasure in there. So take your lantern and then just walk in. And you will have to be ready for what comes. But that's, I think, where courage comes in. So
Right.
I think that's a mindset that kind of helped me sometimes navigate things. Just stop being afraid. Stop obsessing. Just leaps of faith. And just have brothers on the side. You're gonna enter that dark cave. Somebody else entered that same exact dark cave. So just listen to the people around you. It's kind of like one of those blind games, when you're entering blind, but you have these five guys around. It's like 2 steps to the right, 1 step. Oh man, you stepped on the thing. So you're going to have to trust that circle of brotherhood. I think men need men. Don't depend on your wife to tell you that, which I've always done. Um, and those brothers are going to tell you, yep, two more steps. Yep, yeah, yeah. It's going to be hot now. It's gonna get soggy. Yep, you're going to enter a swamp. Move on. Yep, just keep going. So, but yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, so ownership, I love that. And it sounds like brotherhood, you didn't mention this, but I mean, you were already connected with other people to a degree, but it sounds like connecting with other people in a place or a way that inspired ownership and agency was really necessary.
Absolutely.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, the kind of people you described brotherhood wise were people that were not doing it for you, who were sharing with you, like, you know, perspective, hey, two steps forward, but you still had to take the steps. That's the thing with ownership is
Right.
um and you also mentioned courage. And just to reiterate for somebody who's maybe not clear about these things, courage is not the absence of fear. It's actually feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And um what an immature man generally does is says, I'm not going to move forward until I stop being afraid. And ownership says you have to go even while you are afraid. And that's where we find courage, right? Courage is owning the
Sure.
decision to take action
Yep.
even though you're afraid. And that's a maturing process, and I would say it's very difficult to do that without being around other courageous people.
Correct.
So, okay, well, what kind of fruit did this start to produce in your life?
Respect. The respect I was craving so long. Uh,
But how?
you never demand respect. I always demanded it. How was in my actions. It was always in the actions. I focused on myself. I focused on my children. I focused on the well-being of others. I focused on being there for my wife. I actually have a crumpled piece of paper here, uh, dated March 22, where I have kind of like my mission in life, and in there, I can read off of it. But by daily taking small steps to connect with my children and make sure that I'm giving them like not there was a prior version of me who just again did chores, but this one was more intentional. I'm gonna sit with you, be present, connect with you, and cater to your how can I make you most grow the most. So I put my daughter in piano, I put the other daughter, my son in soccer. Like I started doing activities and kind of self-driven. They were no longer authorized or approved or even consulted necessarily by my wife. They were things initial, small little things, but they began from those places. I became a bit clearer about understanding what she expected of me, but what my wife expected of me, and I tried to fill in those gaps. If she expected me to take care of the outside of the house, and while she focused on the inside, I took ownership of that. I continued. I need to still get better at that, but at least I own that, and I totally understand if I may
Can,
have slacked here or there.
can
But
we
yeah,
clarify something though? Um, are you just doing that because your wife says that's what she wants?
no, no. I think as coming from a point of value and principle, as this is my dominion, this is my kingdom, my home is my kingdom, and I want to make sure that um, things are aligned. So, as a man, I had to value the upkeep of my house, and as a man, I had to value, um, you know, uh, you know, things like that. So things like that were always just a chore that was dictated to me before became meant more now. It meant like every
Okay.
action now converted from a chore to an action that came from the heart. If it didn't come from the heart, then I have to work on that area.
Yeah,
So that's how that's how
that's what
that's
I
how
wanted to point out.
yeah, that's how things started shifting. Everything had to come from a value driven place, not
Right.
ironically. And so leadership, really, any area of leadership, leadership in where I continued to be with the brotherhood, honestly, made her gain respect in what I do because she respects this work a lot. And I think when she felt that I was safe and trustworthy in the way I even conduct myself externally, in my encounters in the workplace or otherwise, which felt safe that I'm not anymore in a place where I could go back to the childish negative habits, negative addictions, and such. Um, I think things open up. But again, I mean, she responded by also working on herself, and she responded by figuring out how she can bring herself to another new level of understanding of her own self and why she thinks certain ways.
Yeah.
And the combination was very fruitful, I have to say.
Let me tell you about a common scenario I run into with men that reach out. And I wonder if you could speak to this because of your specific story. A lot of men say in their onboarding, their request, I'm just not sure I'm not sure it's not too late. She's really, really upset. She's even said she's done. Um,
Yeah,
you know, they're
I was that
watching,
guy. I probably said the same thing.
they're watching the level of hurt and the words that she's saying and saying like, yeah, I just don't know if it's possible. What would you say to that man, having been a man like that? Um, I mean, you're still together with your wife, right? So,
Yeah, of course. I think I
are you
think
white knuckling it or like?
no, 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 not at all. I think I'm no longer afraid. I think number one, I think just start there. I'm no longer afraid of my wife. Let's put it that way. It's such a liberating thing. Like all the things we just said, all culminate in the fact that I'm okay no matter what. That brother who's joining in, brother, you're okay. You're okay no matter what. If you truly believe there is a path for you, you're just confused. We're always confused, just at different degrees of awareness at every level as we evolve. So yes, things are messy right now, but if you stick with it, if you own it, and uh, and and be brave to take action consistently, there's a way out. Now, there is no judgment. The book that you recommended, Sven, Success and Beyond Success and Failure, was a massive other fundamental shift. Success and failure, quote unquote, is such a confusing thing. What if that question is being posed by a person who's trying to guarantee success, right? All of us do. Hey, Sven, I'm going to sign up, and in 3 months, I expect success be that we are living Romeo and Juliet lives of sorts.
Right.
But life doesn't work that way. So as long as you reevaluate the concept of success and failure as well, and that true success is really, I'm actually hesitant now to say what success is. As a matter of fact, I don't actually believe in the concept of success or failure. I believe there's just incremental levels of growth. I think
Yeah.
growth is the thing that makes sense to me. Am I growing? Now, you're growing or you're not. Now, growth can be painful. And if you accept that I'm going through growing pains, I didn't know better, and now I'm learning. The growth mindset that they teach kids in school actually will help here. And stop thinking about outcomes as red and green, as success and
Yeah.
fail.
Yeah. This is one of the challenges with my work and process in general is when men reach out to me, what they don't know is that the mindset they're in produces certain questions or KPIs they're really the wrong questions, but they don't know this, right? So what a man's saying is like, can you show me how to not have a messy life and relationship? And I kind of smirk because, well, no, because that's not a good outcome because um, you don't need to be afraid of messes. I'm going to show you how to be a guy that actually embraces the messiness because it's you realize, well, that's where intimacy is found, right? That all the things you've been trying to avoid are actually ultimately things that would lead you to foreplay and intimacy and connection and emotional depth and really enjoying your life. But you've been so afraid of them because of your lack of confidence in the deep part of who you are that you keep running from the very processes that would actually mature you into a man who really likes his life. And but you
Yes.
don't know this when you come into it. That's the problem. And so
Yes.
man
Yes.
wants like, show me the magic bullet that'll make it all better in 90 days. And I'm not gonna tell him
Oh,
that exists.
it's
And
not 90 days. It's not 90 days. It's not a Hulu subscription. Um, uh, It's a lifelong process. It's a long haul. It's take a deep breath and dive in, brother. It's many layers, and it's gonna. I don't even think there's two versions of me. There's a daily version of me. There's not even version 1 and version 2. There's version May 4th, Sunday at 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Really, it's a minute by minute, phase by phase, and every moment is a decision. I think just every moment, be mindful, take a deep breath. Where am I? Where do I stand this moment? And what's the right decision? What's the best decision the best version of me can take? Given what I know, and I have to accept that I don't know the majority of what I need to know, and be okay with that. And just do the best you can, just the best person. Because whatever misfires, at least it came from my place. Hey, I intended to do this by my value system. It didn't turn out okay. That's okay. Now, if you die on that, cool. That's the hill you died on, and I'm happy with that. That's fine. That's really as low level granularity as I think we should. I mean, I try to process it at least.
So it sounds like that's changed your personal confidence quite a bit. You're speaking as a man who's confident, and by that I mean not a cocky way, but you're just not worried about what comes because you have an apparent self-trust that you're going to be able to handle that. Do you find that has that produced a new way of living for you, just to feel like confident
100%.
and
Yeah,
has your
100%.
sense of purpose changed in that process?
Listen, Sven. Yeah, listen. Nobody's ever confident 100% of the time. I just recently got into one of those bouts again, and I accept that too. I accept and I give my permission the right to. Yes, I had I got into a very emotional, again, very deeply shame triggering encounter, and that's another podcast if we can go there. I gave myself the permission to not be okay for a day. That's all right. I gave myself compassion. Yeah, you want to grieve and sob today? Today you can, and that's okay. And to see that, I just accept that that's how I am today. And tomorrow morning I woke up and decided, okay, that was great. I accept that. Now I have the power to reclaim back. Now let's move on. Cool. That was a mucky mess. Let's get up now. It's the resilience course that you have, Sven. I mean, do you have a course for that too? The resilient man is how you bounce back. I think accepting that you ain't going to be perfect. It's just like the best airplane is going to go through its own little turbulence. It's knowing that you're okay and you can call somebody. Somebody's going to be there for you, and you have the tools to navigate this moving forward. Sven, I have never had more deeper, meaningful intimacy with my wife. And when I'm making again, recognizing intimacy, people sometimes confuse intimacy with like intercourse or sex or whatever, and I think that's very shallow. I think intimacy, I've never had greater intimacy with my wife when it comes to conversations, emotional safety, and really the thing that men and women are after. And that fed into the confidence. That fed into the confidence. Is that, and now I know, like, listen,
and
you're okay.
That will generally lead to the best sex, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's valid. That's true. Is things forever perfect? No. That doesn't just always never assume there's always this world is meant to change all the time. I think that keeps it interesting, but it's also like you say, Sven, it's another flex, it's another round, come back, and it's just another growth. It's another rep, like they say.
What do you feel now that you didn't think you'd ever feel?
Freedom. That there's that anything is possible. That anything is possible. That I can do anything. I just have to will it, and I have to make the plan for it and then execute it. Like the things I'm involved with recently with the brothers retreats that I've gone on. Those were concepts that I would have never imagined. I wrote that in my 3-year letter that you asked us to write. It's happening. Those things that the letter to self, like those things are unfolding as you are prioritizing them. Every aspect of that letter is slowly and surely unfolding, and that's a beautiful thing. And it just, each of those tiny little things just builds up a momentum that gives you like, I can do this. I just have to really want it enough, and if I'm not doing it, maybe I haven't wanted it enough. So let me just organize my thoughts right here. Let me just sit back here. What do I really want? Just be very clear. Let's move on. And as long as it's coming from values based, I think anything is possible.
Well, this goes back to self-worth too, right? Like if you have a life that you want, but you deny your own okayness, there's really no path for you to have what you want other than by somebody else giving it to you. And that's what creates the
Yeah.
gridlock in marriage, because you're trying to get your partner
Yes.
to create the life that you want.
Yes.
But ownership, so these things all go together, right? So when I have unconditional high regard for myself, that restores my sense of self-worth. When I marry that with ownership, now I start seeing myself as capable to create the life I want. I don't need to wait for my wife. I don't need to wait for an employer, because I stop believing that I'm inadequate to create my own desires. And I start living in that truth. And that's why men who write these letters start to say, well, lo and behold, it's coming to pass. Because, yeah, you started to believe in sincerity that you could create the life that you want. So you made a phone call maybe to somebody that years ago you would have been hesitant to make because you would have talked yourself out of it. This time you talked yourself into it, saying, yeah, why wouldn't I, right? And so life starts to go a completely different way. You start to have that freedom you're talking about because you have the internal freedom. The inside becomes the outside. When we're immature, we believe the outside flows in. A spiritually, emotionally, mentally, et cetera, mature man, it's the other way around. It's an inside out, right? Our internal state creates our external. And not in a woo-woo way, but simply from what you basically did by your description here is you removed the cause for your self-limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
And
I'm just unafraid to make mistakes.
There you go.
Because I know that making a mistake means judgment, means bad boy, means you have to be perfect, means whatever, blah, blah. So that narrative is a toxic narrative because it measures you based on your output. You're not a machine. You're a human. And humans are more fluid than water, I think. I think we are mostly fluid internally, even biologically. So just it's okay. You're gonna mess up. It's fine. Give yourself permission to error, and with ownership, it doesn't mean the end of the world. Maybe I heard somewhere that walking is the act of falling and catching yourself.
Oh yeah, that's a great metaphor.
So you're always falling. Like that's the default state. Gravity is bringing you down. Accept that. Okay, go fight gravity. Go to the moon or something. But you are gonna be driven to fall down. So accept that, just accept that, and just say that, hey, by getting up is how I get stronger, and fall. It's okay to fall. I said that. I actually loudly said that to my therapist, my marriage counselor with my wife, and that was a pivotal moment. My wife and I, in front of the therapist, I told my wife, give me permission to mess up. And my wife looked at me and was kind of like, yeah, it's okay, let him mess up. And since then I started driving, and I was driving the car after that.
I love it. Yeah, it sounds like it goes along with freedom.
But she had to also, get back into her feminine. That's a whole other conversation. And she did. She grew into her feminine role, and she accepted that as well. And she allowed for the masculine in me to grow. And
okay, hold on. I'm going to stop you because this is too much of a cliffhanger otherwise.
Yeah.
Did that have to happen as part of your growth, or did your growth create the space where that could happen?
Both, I think. But I think my wife grew to trust me when she saw that I was taking actions and I was serious. I was not messing around, that I was taking the action. So she trusted. And when she trusted, and when she saw that I wasn't aggravating the situation, I could aggravate the situation by not being receptive to her states. But I was supportive of her states, and I grew to understand and be curious about them, no matter how hard they hurt,
right?
My ego and such. So she trusted, and so I would have to say, I have to give credit though to her changes as well. I think it would have been a more difficult process. It would have been way more manning up on my side, that all the growth would have happened through me alone. I have to say that it was shouldered
both
by her
partners
growth as well. Right.
We're all going to be growing, right? But a lot of men live in this story where I'm not going to be more masculine until she's more feminine, and that's what I was trying to point out. Is it doesn't seem
no. I couldn't wait for that. No.
Right.
It naturally happened.
It doesn't really happen that way. And a lot of women have told me, their side of this, which is, well, it's not that I want to lead and do this masculine stuff, but I also know if I don't, nobody's going to do it.
Correct.
And so um, most men kind of bemoan how angular, edgy, bossy, mean, or what they call masculine their wives are, not realizing that she's doing that because
Just filling a gap.
she's filling a gap because you're avoiding some certain things in your
Yeah.
life. And so if you step into those roles, if you overcome your fear of failure and a number of other things, and you start becoming the best
Yeah.
version of yourself, most women will acknowledge that slowly because they need time to know that it's trustable and real.
Yeah.
And they will kind of let go of those reins. And then you get to, they get to be a version of themselves that they actually prefer and that you probably prefer also.
Yeah.
Right?
Someone has to wear the pants in the relationship.
Yeah, that could be, a lot of people could take that as a derogatory thing, but I agree.
Well,
I would say
if
somebody has to lead.
the metaphorical, I guess.
Yeah.
And
I don't take it that way. I meant that,
yeah, I meant like somebody has to lead with masculinity, with a true sense of value-driven masculinity. And if the man is not filling that role, the woman will have to step up, and that's not a good dynamic.
She will generally be quite upset about it.
It's not her natural state. She doesn't want to be there, but she finds obliged.
Right. Well, curious, what do you wish you had understood sooner? If that's even a real thing for you.
Of course. I think all these things we've talked about, give me one of those things, I would be much happier. I just wished I knew myself. Like if there was an older version, like the version of me now, which is still immature, by the way, with respect to my next version. If it were to go back to my older self, it would have focused more on true self-worth and really told it, listen, you're not worthy because of your grades or the job that you have. Listen, what is it? You're really worthy on just as is on your own, and focus on yourself. Don't don't obsess over validation. You're not what your others tell you you are. And then taking things personal, out the window.
So if somebody listening to this is saying, it's like this guy Mohamed is like living my life, right? And they feel maybe as stuck as you did a number of years ago. What's the first thing you would tell them that they should do?
Take a deep breath.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Take a deep breath. Yeah, it's kind of like you're going to dive, right? You're going to take a deep breath and dive. You have to get very clear about what you're trying to do. What are you trying to do? Oftentimes, what you really need to do is be clear on your part that you own as well. Like what? Listen, if you're in any situation, always ask how what part of you could have made that better. I think a lot of the times we'll realize that it's a lot of wrong thinking, a lot of beliefs that we've had. Our beliefs, we just accept, well, as you take a deep breath and dive into this new journey, accept that you have beliefs that are not helping you. And you're going to be in for a journey to reevaluate all your beliefs because they've been holding you back. And they're what brought you here. And you're going to work on rooting out those beliefs and replacing them with new ones.
That's beautiful. Would there be something that you'd want such a person to know is possible, like in the form of encouragement?
Yeah, everything is possible. Everything is possible. Really, you have to be open to that. The universe hasn't judged you yet. You're alive, you're breathing, which means anything is possible. Really, I mean, I'm sounding like Mr. I don't know, some other weird cliched character that says you can be a president too. But I think we are in crisis because we are seeing the circle of the storm. But if you were to zoom out far enough, there is really no storm. If you were to zoom out far enough, there is no earth. I think if we were to really zoom out just far enough to say like the entire universe isn't crashing as much as it looks like it is. Like when you're in the middle of a hurricane, it's doomsday, but it's actually not doomsday. We know it's not doomsday,
Hmm.
but it is because you're in the middle of it and you're being smacked by flying cars. Um, so find shelter. You're going to have to find shelter. You're going to have to find a safe place. And Brotherhood is a safe place. That's the place where you go. These are where the people are huddled up, or at least they have this safe shelter telling you, come here, come here. We kind of know a passage that can take you outside the storm if you just kind of let yourself, uh, you have to let go and trust.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything that we didn't talk about that you think we should?
I don't know, man. I think I kind of spilled my guts here.
Yeah,
Um,
you did so beautifully, by the way. I
Thank
really
you, man.
love your vulnerability, which is, it's that vulnerability, by the way, that's going to create increased sense of intimacy in your life, because you just got on a podcast and told people some pretty hardcore stuff, right? And you told them, like, here's who I was, and here's where I'm headed, and here's how and why, and the ugliness involved, but you could do
Yeah,
that because of freedom. And all
yeah.
those things are working together now to create the life that you want, which is interesting. But yeah, would you have done this a couple years ago?
No, no way. If there's one thing that just came to mind is I think it's what motivates you, Sven. What wakes you up in the morning is now kind of what wakes me up now, or what gives me energy. It's one now that you've gone through this
Coffee?
journey. Oh, don't get me started. Coffee is another podcast. Coffee is another podcast.
Yeah, we could do that.
No, it's helping other men. I think finding just service is that you've gone through this. You just want to help the other guy. Just flash a light to them and tell them, come, it's okay. It's gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna get through this. You're gonna grow up. There's a boy part of you that's growing. It looks like we're big people that we believe we're fully fledged adults, but a lot of us are still boys in big bodies. There's a lot of growth internal. So
Yeah. Well, there's a
yeah,
real beautiful thing about that too, and it's that what you're talking about is you decided to give new meaning to your story, and we all have to do this, and I did that, and I think that's what you're pointing out is you can choose, if you cooperate with the process, to start seeing those hurricanes as major points to the plot of your life, and that you're actually living a really exciting story, that
true,
your story, my story, they have plots, and those plots, don't you want an exciting plot, right?
true, true,
and
true,
and that you can turn around and use that story, the most painful things in your life, to actually be the most productive things in your life,
true.
right? This is what I think is our greatest capacity as humans, is we get to choose the meaning we make from things, and including the lamest stuff that's ever happened to us. We can turn it around and we can use it to help another human to find freedom, right?
one Hundred
And so
percent.
I'm really excited about the ways that you're helping other men find freedom by showing them, like, hey man, here's where I was, and
Yeah,
here's what I walked through, and here's how I did it. Like, to me, that's the point. That's how you die with a smile on your face. Um,
yeah,
and as a free man, is that you just share your story with people,
true.
and let it do its work.
Yes, sir.
Any final last words?
I think I said enough. We
Okay.
could we could give people a break.
Well, I'll have you back. There's a number of topics we talked about today that I think are worth doing whole shows on. Unconditional high regard, um, a woman's sense of betrayal. That'd be interesting. The subject of porn and shame. So many things we talked about today covered such a huge gamut of a man's experience. I appreciate you popping the cork on so many of those things,
Of course, my
and
pleasure.
I'm very appreciative for your friendship.
Same. Appreciate everything you do, Sven. To give it to you, man. You were a fundamental part of my journey. So
Well,
thank you.
only because I had been on my own.
Mhm.
Appreciate it. All right, brother. I will see you soon, I hope, in another
Take
episode.
care.
All
This
right.
is wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Masterful Man podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to break free from stuckness, build unshakable confidence, and lead your life with unstoppable purpose, I invite you to take the next step. Join a community of men who are committed to growth, challenge, and real transformation. Learn more at www.masterful.men, because the life you want starts with the man you choose to become.